Good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you this evening to be able to talk to you on this 50th anniversary event for RBBP. And thanks to Mark for inviting me to be able to talk to you. I'd like to talk to you this evening about RBBP and providing the data from the perspective of us down here in Kent. It's not just me that's involved in RBBP down here. It's Brian Watmow, who's the RBBP rep, and I very much assist Brian. But Brian kindly allowed me to do the presentation this evening, so I'm here to talk to you. And I've got a late night slot. Hopefully there's a reasonable number of you still on call. So pour yourself another glass of wine, whiskey, whatever, and hopefully in the next 15 minutes or so be able to give you some interesting information about RBBP from a Kent perspective. So I've mentioned that Brian Watmow is the Kent RBBP rep, as you can see on the first slide here, who does what in Kent when it comes to RBBP. And Brian is very much the point of contact for most matters to do with RBBP records and putting together the annual report. So he's the sort of main point of contact. I'm chair of the KOS Conservation Surveys Committee, and that has a lot of overlap, obviously, with things like monitoring RBBP in Kent and other matters. So I have a lot of overlap with Brian. Barry Wright is our county recorder. So obviously we need to go to Barry for records, and particularly those species that are also BBRC records. So it's primarily Savage Water, I guess. And Robin Mace is the absolute lynch man. He's the county archivist, and he maintains our database and basically pulls everything together for us so that the whole process of RBBP can start. Just get my next slide. There we go. So Kent, are we an important county for RBBP? Well, despite the fact that we're sandwiched between London and the Channel ports, and we seem to have massive housing developments and new roads going on everywhere, and being in the sunny corner of the country, we've got lots of solar energy farms going up now as well. So there's massive threats to the county. But we still do have quite a decent array of RBBP species, as you can see in the slide here. I've highlighted the ones that I think are probably the Kent most important species. Obviously, turtle dove has been recently identified from the survey as showing that Kent is the #1 county for turtle dove in the UK, and we've got an estimated 700 pairs. Black redstart, 10 to 20 pairs quite typically each year, so that puts us somewhere around 25% of the UK population. Turtle dove was 33%. Pochard, we have probably around about 15 to 20% of the UK population. Lesser spotted woodpecker seems to be holding up. In Kent, we have an estimate of 150 to 200 pairs. Typically each year we report fewer than that, but basically we've probably got the second most biggest population of lesser spots in the UK, after Hampshire, I guess. And then medgull varies because of our habitats and the effects of spring tides and so on. We can have good years and bad years, but anywhere between 100 and 500 pairs of medgulls, which again puts us somewhere around 20% of the UK population. So you can see we've got some really big populations of RBBP species, and we'll typically report about 25 or so, and sometimes up to about 28 species each year in the report. And I couldn't not mention nightingale, which we're about to do a survey this year. We've got about 1,000 pairs in Kent, and that is also a reasonably useful population in terms of the UK. So where does the RBBP information come from? I expect this is probably similar to most counties, but you know, in Kent we have our own county database for reporting sightings. and obviously bird track, increasingly eBird. Our reserves, we've got several RSPB reserves, and we certainly have good contact with our RSPB wardens to extract information from them reserves each year. The Wildlife Trust in Kent, unfortunately, I'll be careful what I say, but they don't do a lot of monitoring on their reserves. So unfortunately, we don't get any data really from the Kent Trust reserves unless people go in there and make observations and report to us. Two observatories, Sandwich Bay and Dungeness, they have fairly wide recording areas, and we get a lot of useful information from the wardens and their observatory reports. And of course, very important, individuals. You know, it's important to know your individual birders, those that really get around a lot, your very experienced top birders, because they'll know what's going on in all the far corners of the county, very often with including RBBP species. So having contact with them is paramount. Rigging groups can contribute some useful information as well, and increasingly we need to keep an eye on social media. A lot of stuff gets put on Twitter, WhatsApp, and we try to pull out what records we can from those sources. I guess the whole summation of all of this is networking. You really do need to tap into all the sources of bird information in the county that you can. So I would really stress things like making sure you have a good relation with your RSPB wardens and reserves in your county if you have them. Birders out there that you can sort of directly contact for information. Really is networking is the key thing to being able to make sure you get a reasonably complete set of information on RBBP. So moving on, how is the actual report produced? Well, again, I suppose this overlaps a lot with what other counties will do, but at the end of every year, Robin Mace, our archivist, will pull together all the records from bird track, eBird, and our own sightings database, and pull that all together, along with RSPB reserve data, which we get sent to us now automatically, comes through from RSPB every year. We've managed to establish that. And that all gets summed up, and Robin Mace then sends out data sheets to Brian and myself, from which we can start to compile the RBBP report. At the same time, Brian and to an extent myself will contact those individuals and groups that we know might have useful information in order to get data from them. And then we divide the species. Brian does the majority. I do a few species that are of particular interest to me, sort of gulls, terns, waders. And then we start to put together the report from those data sheets that we've got and those other sources of information to put into the RBBP template. And it normally takes 2 or 3 spreadsheets to get all the Kent data in. So that's another reason for splitting the species. Brian normally fills up his, and then I sort of do my species in a separate spreadsheet. And then we have constant meetings during that process, or at least 2 or 3 meetings, to make sure we know how it's all going, any difficulties, any difficult species, if anyone who's not yet got back to us, that sort of thing. We'll sort of decide how to chase those things up. And then once the whole thing's drafted, I normally go through and check that it's all looking okay. So in particular, things like, you know, are those sort of probable, possible, confirmed species matching up to what we've given in the breeding codes, and vice versa? And have we given all the location details, check the grid references? It's quite a lot to go through and check, but obviously I'd like to make sure that the whole thing is as accurate and complete as possible, so that we don't have to do too much corrections to stuff later on down the line. So I thought it'd be interesting to sort of pose just to say, well, what is an RBBP species as far as we're concerned in Kent? Because if you went to a lot of bird watchers in Kent to say you need information on rare breeding birds, they'd probably think you were talking about a few species that are quite widespread in the UK, which are now sadly very rare in Kent. So I've put here a list of species that are now probably rarer than a lot of RBBP species in some cases in the county. I mean, grey partridge is now really limited in terms of wild population to a small population in the northeast of the county. Common snipe has now ceased breeding a few years ago. We don't have any common snipe breeding in the county now, but if there are any drumming birds, there'd be quite a rarity. Greater black-backed gull has just potentially recolonised, but certainly in terms of recent decades, colonised the county. We've got less than 5 pairs. It's a really rare breeding bird. Marsh tit, interestingly, seems to be collapsing in Kent, and even some top birders doing work on lesser spots can't find marsh tits in most places, although they seem to be tripping over them next door in Sussex. So I don't quite know what's going on there, but we're really concerned about marsh tits. We've lost wood warbler as a breeding species, grasshopper warbler, probably fewer than 20 species. We've recently lost common redstart. Until recently, there was just 1 or 2 pairs left in the county. Wheatears, very isolated, just a few pairs down at Dungeness. Tree sparrow, we've got an isolated population on the Walham Marsh. Lesser redpoll, maybe just the odd pair in some of our western woodlands. So these are all species which are really rare breeding birds in Kent, but of course in the rest of the UK they're probably quite widespread species. But I just thought it'd be interesting as I'm talking about things from a Kent perspective to just highlight the fact that in some cases the RBBP species are actually a lot more common than some other birds that have got breeding in the county. So I thought it'd be useful to obviously talk about some of the issues that we have in Kent, which I suppose could be divided between species and the data process. The problem species are really those that are still quite widespread. So as a result, they are very under-recorded. So things like hobby and lesser-spotted woodpecker, which is still fairly widespread across the county, only get reported on a few sites. So we've got a dearth of records, but we know there's a lot more out there than get reported. So we're in that process of having to try and estimate population, which can get quite difficult. There are some super secretive species, obviously long-eared owl, very hard to find. Hawfinch, how many are there? Well, they're very hard to find now, and there are a few sites up on the downs mainly. And certain species are very difficult because of their habitat to actually see them and work out how many territories there are, like bearded tit. And we don't know quite what species are going to come onto our books to start recording, and which ones we're going to lose, of course. So we've got rid of a few species like firecrest and water owl that were quite common and pose a problem, but there might be other ones like that that come along in the future. The biggest issue in terms of data is really a lack of meaningful data now, increasingly, that we seem to sort of struggle to get from observers, just not giving us breeding codes or any idea of what is going on in terms of the breeding side of things. So, what does 3 mean? Is that 3 birds flying over? Is it 2 males and a female? Is it a pair? What does it mean? So we're always appealing for better quality data to be sent in. Some of our RSPB reserve data is somewhat variable from year to year, so we have to sort of try and drill down there and work out exactly what's going on. And also we find increasing problems with social media. I'll come on to that in the next slide. But also we need to make sure that when we've got a lot of data together from these non-regular sources, that we make sure that gets back onto our county database, and that doesn't sort of slip the net there. So to finish with, I just thought I'd like to sort of go over some of the negatives and positives in terms of the future of RBBP in Kent. We've got 3 coastlines, so everybody wants to go to the good birding areas on the coast, and we have big problems of people not covering the inland areas, farmland and woodland inside the county. As I was just talking about social media, people increasingly put their records on WhatsApp, Twitter, instead of properly submitting records, which makes it increasingly difficult to pull together records. And finding volunteers generally to help with the whole process, whether that's helping with surveys, the process of collating records, processing data. Widespread problem across the county, but that is an issue for us. But on the positive side, we've developed some really good networks, and we're able to sort of get data from a good range of sources now. Computers, mobile devices make the whole process of gathering data, of course, much easier, and organising surveys. Also, a lot of our RBBP species are actually not doing too badly. As I say, there's some other species that aren't doing so well at all. And as I've mentioned, anyway, that's the situation from a Kent perspective. So I'd be glad to take any questions that anyone has. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.